are listening to Go Youth Podcast with Ali SA. So, let's talk about all the societal issues affecting the youth, issues such as relationships, money, and many more. Lucky thing is that you can listen to Go Youth Podcast in the comfort of your own home. Go Youth Podcast, by the youth, for the youth, about the youth. You are listening.
Good evening to everyone. Thank you so much for taking your time to come and join the show tonight. My name is Ali. I'll be your host for tonight. I have my guests here, which are also coming from our brothers coming from Kenya and also our brothers coming from South Africa. Very quickly, I just want to get to my brother here from Kenya, Wachiri Mutati, to introduce himself, and the rest will follow. Wachiri Mutati.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Wachira Mutathi speaking from Nairobi, Kenya. And I'm very privileged today to be invited once again to this forum to share my thoughts and opinion and discuss about Africa. It's always an honor to be here. I would also like to give my gratitude to the organizers and particularly you, the host, Ali, for the manner you have been handling this conversation since we begin some few months ago, since I joined in some few, not months, but weeks ago. And we have been building, from the discussions, and we are seeing that our discussions are also leading and paving way to the other ones that will come in future. So today, I hope in the spirit of Pixley, Kaisa Kaseme, you are very own South African, that we are going to discuss this topic with a lot of conviction as Africans. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, my brother. We're moving to Omondi, our brother from Kenya. Omondi, please introduce yourself to the house. Please
Hello.
unmute.
Good evening once again. It's an hello. I hope I'm audible.
Yes, sir. Yes, you're audible, Omondi. Please go through.
Yes, once again, I'm glad to have joined you, and having been chosen among the many.
Okay, I believe Omondi might be experiencing some issues. Let's go back once again. Omondi.
Hello, good evening.
Okay, not sure.
I hope you're doing
Omondi,
well.
can you hear us? Yes, we can. Okay, all right, that's fine. I believe Omondi is just having some technical issues. Very quickly, let's move to SK Manoho. I hope I pronounced it well.
Yes, Ali.
SK, please introduce yourself.
Good evening, Africa. This is Manoa. Okay. Good evening, Africa. This is SK Manoa from Nairobi, Kenya. I'm happy to be part of this discussion tonight, and I hope that we learn together as we continue in this evening. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, SK Manoa. Very quickly, let's go back to Omondi. Omondi, please introduce yourself to the house. I see that other colleagues are finding it difficult to connect. Omondi, please introduce yourself.
Yes.
Omondi, are
yes,
you there?
Good evening once again. I'm sorry for the network issues. This is Oduor Omondi from Nairobi, Kenya. I'm also glad as we are going to talk and speak throughout this discourse of Pan-Africanism. It's my... Yes, I am. Am I audible?
Yes, sir. We can hear you loud and clear. We can hear you loud and clear.
You are listening to Go Youth Podcast with Ali SA. So let's talk about all the societal issues affecting the
Hello.
youth, issues such as relationships, money, and many more. Lucky thing is that you can listen to Go Youth Podcast in the comfort of your own home. Go Youth Podcast by the youth, for the youth, about the youth. You are listening to Go Youth Podcast with Ali
Yes.
SA. So let's talk about all the societal issues affecting the youth,
Yes. Good
issues
evening.
such
I'm
as
sorry about the network
relationships,
issues.
money, and many
This is
more.
Odwar
Lucky thing is
Omondi from
that you
Nairobi,
can
Kenya.
listen to Go
It's
Youth
another
Podcast in the
wonderful
comfort of your
evening.
own home. Go Youth
Among the
Podcast.
scholars around, we've been delighted to be chosen to discuss of this discourse of Pan-Africanism. Thank you and welcome. We are going to speak even as we continue throughout this discourse. Thanks.
All right. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, brothers. I believe in South Africa, we are having a problem in terms of load shedding, where there's a power cut. Most of the people have invited. Some of them are experiencing load shedding, but they're trying to connect with their phones. I believe they'll find us along the way. Let's take a quick break. And when we come back, we're going to start with our motion very quickly.
You are listening to Go Youth Podcast with Ali SA. So let's talk about all the societal issues affecting the youth, issues such as relationships, money, and many more. Lucky thing is that you can
I believe I'm audible. I can see that this evening a lot of people are experiencing some technical issues. All right, let me check with my guest first if they're able to hear me. Everything is fine. Let me check with you, Wachiri Mutati. Can you hear me? And also SK, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
All right, not a problem. I see most of our guests are disconnecting. I believe they are having some technical issues. Very quickly, they'll find us along the way while we go through. Very quickly, I want to check with you, Wachiri Mutachi, looking on the Pan-Africanism. What is your understanding looking on the Pan-Africanism in detail? What else was still waiting for our colleagues?
Okay, thank you, Ali. Pan-Africanism, first of all, Pan-Africanism is a very interesting topic to talk about, and also a very mindful topic, especially when it comes to matters of Africa, because I think most of the things, even if you've noticed since when we started discussing these matters, they have always led to this, what we call Pan-Africanism. It has always built up to Pan-Africanism, or rather the spirit of Pan-Africanism. So Pan-Africanism, to put it in context, is the idea that the people of African descent, please note that African descent, yeah? So the people of African descent, despite them being whether in or outside the continent of Africa, have common interest and should be unified. So the Pan-Africanism, or rather the spirit of Pan-Africanism, began way back, in the early 20th century with the conferences that were held in London and other cities in the world from 1900 to 1923, that is 1923, and it also came about with what we call the Pan-African Congress. It was a series of 8 meetings that were intended to address the issues of Africa as a result of the European colonization. So the Pan-Africanism issue and the concept of Pan-Africanism is brought by that idea, or rather after they have been oppressed so much and they want now to address the issues facing Africa as a result of European colonization that had happened, especially across Africa. So in 1919, we see the first Pan-African Congress that is happening in Paris, and later we come to see people like Pixley Kaisa Kaseme, who I had mentioned when we begin this conversation, who is also considered to be the father of the Africa and the founder of African National Congress. And we also see people like W.E.B. Du Bois. We also see even Africans, indigenous Africans like Jomo Kenyatta, they really playing a part of in Pan-Africanism or the Pan-African Congress. And it is mostly the Pan-Africanism, or rather to describe Pan-Africanism is a bit difficult because people have various different views, but it all boils down to the idea that people of African descent have a common interest and they should be united. The interesting thing is not much in the definition, but rather in the concept. So for me, this is what I understand to be Pan-Africanism. So that's my brief understanding of that topic. Thank you.
Okay. Very quickly. I just want to go back to the question. Like, the question was that what is Pan-Africanism and the Pan-African Congress movement, and also the question that I also want to ask to you is that how is, I could say, I see that some colleagues are trying to connect. I think they're having some issues. That will connect. Sorry about that. How it is important. And why is it necessary, or it was just a jargon to put across their elites? One thing that I want to understand, looking on the Pan-Africanism, we need to know whether is it important, looking on the movement in detail, and if it's important, why is it important? Was it necessary for us to have this movement as African? I'm still on you, Mwachiri Mutati.
Oh, yeah, actually, that's a good way to put it. You see, first of all, to answer the first question, why was it important? That's why I was really laying emphasis on the people of African descent, and also laid more emphasis while I was talking on what we call to address the effects of the European colonization. Remember, this particular time when the Pan-Africanism and the Pan-African Congress is happening, the Europeans are already colonizing Africa. So it is very important, and that's why it is still very important to address this issue for the purpose of common interest. But at that particular time in the earlier 20th century, it was not just a jargon. It came about with a spirit to liberate and make the people of Africa, especially those who were colonized at that particular time, to put them or transfer them to an independent state or states that were there in Africa. So it was very important, and it was very necessary, and it is still necessary to put up to today. But the problem today, it has just been looked upon as if it is more of a jargon. Just people are saying Pan-Africanism here and there, but it is necessary. It was necessary, and it must remain necessary.
All right. Thank you so much, Mwachiri Mutati. Very quickly, I'm moving to SK Manoa. I'm posing the same question to you. What is the Pan-Africanism? And also, was it necessary for us to have this movement? Please unmute SK.
Okay. To answer the question.
The question is on the screen. Yeah. Yes, we can hear you. Yes, we can hear you, sir.
Hello.
We can hear you. I'm not sure if you can read the question on the screen.
On the issue of Pan-Africanism as a whole. Yes. I'm coming to the question. So I'm saying, on the issue of Pan-Africanism, this is a way of bringing Africans together in the world as a way of making them one. So on the second part of the Congress, this Congress was first convened by the likes of Afro-Americans in Americas, like Du Bois and George Padmore, as a way of bringing the blacks all over the world in an attempt to make them one unit. And then on the issue of the importance of Pan-Africanism, yes, this issue is important because we see that it has issues like it has been able to help increase awareness on issues such as racism and ending colonization. Because at that time, the most important thing was to make sure that the Africans were able to gain independence from the colonizers. Because for that to happen, there ought to be unity among the Africans. And then also the issue of political awareness among the people of African origin, and creating a sense of concern for suffering of the blacks. Because at that time, you see that various black people were being oppressed all over the world by the Europeans who had come to Africa to take the colonies. And then on the issue of it being a jargon, yes, we see it is coming to play, because currently most African countries, they appear to be just going for their own concerns alone as a country and not going there as a unit. So currently there's that aspect of it being a juggle, and that's a way of formality. Okay, thank you.
Okay, very quickly. Sorry about that. Very quickly, I'm gonna move to Omondi. Omondi, please unmute, because I see that you're on mute. Looking at the question that we have on the screen, Omondi, what is Pan-Africanism on your understanding, and whether is the Pan-African Congress movement, it is important, and also are we really benefiting from this movement? All right.
Yes,
Omondi,
thank you.
unmute. All right, go through.
Yes, thank you. I hope I'm audible enough.
Yes.
Yeah, sorry about the network issues. So Pan-Africanism and the Pan-African Congress movement, majorly the Pan-Africanist ideas were first brought and in the mid-19th century, mostly in the United States, that were mostly led by the Africans who are from the western side of the hemisphere. And the Pan-Africanists who are majorly known for them was the major one I know of was Alexander Crummell. These people, they coined the term Pan-Africanism as a movement for the political union of all the African nations and even those in the diaspora. Pan-Africanism indeed was majorly an attempt to create a sense of collaboration, brotherhood, and to the feminist sisterhood among all people of African descent, whether they lived on this continent called Africa or in the other continents of Europe, and emancipated the aspirations of the people and the values of the European culture and the world of African colonies. So their major themes were raised on the excerpt that the aspirations needed to have been achieved by then. So in realizing the Pan-African Congress movement, the Congress movement was majorly formulated to reach the economic. Economic simply means the matters dealing with finance, financial assistance, and so on and so forth, of the markets and a political landscape for the continent. So it was bridged in the 1776, whereby the Pan-African Congress then, I think it was the fifth, that was formed and coined by Sylvester Williams in 1897, that led to this Pan-African Association. So to this extent, I think its major importance so far, it is of benefit, yes. So as PLO Lumumba places it, the Pan-Africanism today is socio-political and cultural, in that the views of African and African descents and the descendants themselves majorly in the diaspora see it as a single entity, whereby it aims to renew and unite Africa and foster a sense of unity among the people of African continent and those that have the belief that Africa itself and Africanism itself has been bred for quite some time. So as we continue, we are going to in the preceding questions, you are going to see the necessity and the importance that Pan-Africanism and the Pan-African Congress movement has brought to Africans and African continent as a whole, and the African descents who live in the diaspora. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much. Very quickly, I want to go back to Wachiri Mutati. Very quickly, I want to come up with the follow-up question before we move to the next question. Looking on the Pan-Africanism and the movement that is called Pan-African Congress movement. I'm aware that the Pan-African Congress movement, and also looking on the Pan-Africanism, actually, we're looking at Africans who needs to have like a common interest. But my question is that, do you think that we as Africans, we have the common interest?
Thank you, Ali. First of all, I don't know whether it is on my side, but there is a background noise that is running. There is some sound that is somewhat confusing.
Not a problem.
So if you please, you can check on that.
Not a problem.
To answer your question very directly, we are Africans, and the issue of being African is what it brings us together. Whether you're from Guinea-Bissau, whether you're from South Africa, whether you're from Uganda, name them, all those countries, Egypt, we still have a common interest for the fact that we are not only in one geographical area, not only it is not by design, by default, that was made by the creators of this world. We have a common interest by the fact that we share the same borders. We come from a various diverse places, but within the same area of the world means we share the same interest, or rather we have somewhat similar interest, because talk about the economic interest, talk about the political interest, because somewhat, when people who study international relations, they do understand that there are different levels in international relations. We have the individual level, we have the regional level, and we have the global level. So in terms of the individual level, we have presidents or heads of state and governments who affect various countries that are not there. So we have similar interests to look upon this. But remember, we said that each and every country in this world has a nationalistic way of looking at things. Kenya will be interested in solving issues of Kenya first before we look upon matters of Uganda and our neighboring countries. South Africa will care about itself first before even thinking about Madagascar. However, because we are limited in this geographical space, and we are also in similar predicament. Many African countries have the same level of people who are uneducated, poverty, and we are facing similar problems for that matter. So I think you have the various, despite our various and diverse cultures and on in Africa, we still have similar interests. However, even despite that nationalistic mode of thinking and way of operation, people who also still study international relations talk about the idealism. Idealists are those people who think that when a country or different countries think beyond this nationalistic way of doing things, they can be able to do better things and even avoid things like going to war. So to answer your question, I think we have similar interests, but not much similar. But we still have similar interests.
Okay, all right, not a problem, brother. Thank you so much for taking that. And just have a look there. It looks like your network there. We are no longer able to see you, but we are able to hear you. Just try to reconnect again so that we can establish the connection. We are not able to see you, but we are able to hear. Okay, see that the picture is coming back again. All right, I want us to move to the second question. This is a very quite interesting question. Um, the question that I'll be asking to you guys is that we'll be actually trying to relate the African Union in line with the Agenda 2063. And also, one thing that I want to explain to you guys, looking on the Agenda 2063, I'm quite sure we are all aware that the Agenda 2063, it includes the likes of the integrated high-speed training network, the African commodity strategy, the African continental free trade area, the African passport and free movement of people, silencing the guns by 2020, the Grand IGAA Dam project, the Single African Air Transport Market, and also the African Economic Forum, the African Financial Institute, the Pan-African E-Network, the Africa Outspace Strategy, the African Virtual and E-University, the Cybersecurity Create Africa Museum. You see, there are a lot of things that needs to be done in Africa. Looking at them, there are a lot of them that needs to be done. I'm quite interested, especially looking on the E-University, looking on the African Outspace Strategy. Some quite interesting, but very quickly, those ones, we'll come back to them. Now, this is the question that I'm going to start by posing to Omondi. The question is that, to what extent is the Agenda 2063 and the African Union is generally aligning with the spirit of the Pan-Africanism? And how effective and successful is it? Because remember, when we're talking about the 2063, we're talking about the plan that they're having, the ones which they've just read out for you, looking on the Africans' commodity, the African passport and free movement, silencing guns, the likes of the silencing guns, and also the the Single African Air Trade Market, African Economic Forum, African Financial Institute, the Pan-African E-Network, the African Outer Space, the African Virtual and E-University, and Cybersecurity, the Great African Museum, a lot of them as we have them. Now, I'm asking this question to you, Omondi. To what extent is the Agenda 2063 and the African Union in general aligning with the spirit of the Pan-Africanism? And how effective is it? Is it successful, Omondi? Please unmute.
Yes, to a greater extent, the Agenda 2063 is aligning to the African Union. But then, has it been effective? According to me, no. Why? Let us look at the main goal of the African Union. The African Union main goal is majorly to defend the sovereignty and the territorial integrity and independence of Africa, to eradicate all forms of colonialism from Africa, and then to promote international cooperations. Have all this been reached by the Agenda 2063? Let us look, for example, silencing the guns by 2020. Was it really achieved? Some scholars say yes, some say no. which to some extent, according to me, is a no. Because why is this so? Agenda 2063, as in the previous forum, we discussed on matters Agenda 2063, where we spoke about the Pan-African Virtual and E-University, African Commodity Strategy, the African Economic Forum, African Continental Free Trade Area, and the African Passport and Free Movement of People, where we found that looking at majorly the African Commodity Strategy, as this been brought out by the African Union, is Africa itself united? Are we really having a united Africa for it to be called a union? No, we are not having it. Why? Because this is proved ineffective, thereby bridging a spirit of Pan-Africanism that is really sleeping. Let me use that term, sleeping, in quote, because there are those who fight for that which is good and right, while there are those who sit back and really try to place it as a lukewarm. Let me use the term lukewarm. There are some who are lukewarm, and there are some who say no. There are some who are spirit driven in fighting for what is good and right for the African Union. Looking at the various scholars who have spoken about this and so on and so forth. Let me go back to what we spoke about majorly on the African passport and the free movement for a united Africa. For a united Africa to be achieved in the Agenda 2063 is the African Union itself having the major things that need to be put in place. Number one is the ratification. Is the ratification going to be effectual? As far as I'm concerned, as at now, it has not been effectual. For Agenda 2063 to be achieved, we only have less than probably 40 to 50 years, which since its inception in 2013, we've only used 10 years, of which these 10 years have been majorly influenced by various challenges. The challenge number one is we want a skillful youth, a skillful generation by 2063. Will this be achieved? No, because as we see now, it's 10 years down the line. There are some places which don't have basic education that the colonialists are perceived to have left it for us. Yet we claim that we are going to have a spirit of Pan-African. We are having a spirit of Pan-Africanism that is relevant to the discourse. Well, for someone to be convicted and have a spirit driven of Pan-Africanism that is effective, the Agenda 2063 goals that have been put in place need to have a falsified enforcement by the various countries, the various 54 countries that constitute a united Africa, for us as a people to effectualize what is called the African Union. For African itself, the African countries, for instance, we claim to be patriotic to our various countries, yet it is nationalistic. We are nationalistic in various views, being that the borders that are put in place and so on and so forth, they are only things that bridge what is good for us as a people. Because if a territory of Kenya is being, for instance, is being brought to a close, I will have to defend things pertaining to Kenya and not those pertaining to South Africa. Why? Because I pretend or insinuate that I'm patriotic, yet that is a nationalistic view. For us to have a spirit-driven Pan-African Union, we need to be having an extended and an entrenched and a flourishing culture of human rights that have been put in place, democracy that is independent of all the 54 African states, gender equality, inclusion, and peace for a united Africa, and this will help in bridging the extent to which the Agenda 2063 and the African Union in general aligning with the spirit of Pan-Africanism, and this will by 2063 lead to an effective and a successful Africa and Pan-Africanism. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Omondi. You have touched it in detail very quickly. I'm going to start with SK. What is your reaction? Looking on the Agenda 2063 and the African Union, whether is in aligning with the spirit of the Pan-Africanism? If so, how effective is it? And is it successful? Because Omondi just made an example to say that there was on the Agenda 2063. If you can have a look on it, it's silencing guns by 2020. Now we're in 2022. Are guns silenced in Africa? No. Okay. What's your reaction, Omondi?
Okay.
Oh, sorry, SK.
Okay, on that issue, I think if you say about the issue of an AU and Pan-Africanism and the Agenda 2063, I think for now we are still very far, mainly because of many issues in Africa. I think, for example, if you see about the AU and Pan-Africanism, ideally the issue of Pan-Africanism has two faces, because initially this was the formation of the African Americans who first of all came up with this idea of Pan-Africanism. So when they brought this to Africans, like the likes of Kwame Nkrumah and Jomo Kenyatta of Kenya, you see that it was somehow sluggish in some way because what the likes of Padmo and Du Bois were up to when they formed Pan-Africanism, they somehow their bar was too high for the likes of Nkrumah and the rest of Africanism of Pan-Africanism to continue with the activities of what what the African Americans had begun to do. So, and then on the issue of Agenda 263, we see now on the, like, for example, the issue of guns silencing by 2063. So currently we see that many countries in Africa are still having violence, mainly because by 2020, mainly because the regimes are somehow violent and corrupt in some way. And then also there is the issue of gender equality in most governments. So currently, the composition of the governments in most states of Africa, there is the issue of male dominance over the females, in that the most positions are occupied by their male counterparts.
Yeah.
And then also there is the problem where the AU is like white elephant, because the African countries are just acting on their own evolution without being in close consideration. So if you consider those factors, you see that there's a big disconnect between the Pan-Africanism of the past and what the AU is doing currently. So I think that is my contribution.
All right. Thank you so much for that. I can see that there is a disconnect based on your submission. Very quickly, now I'm going to move to Wachibi.
You are listening to Go Youth Podcast with Ali SA. So let's talk about all the societal issues affecting the youth, issues such as relationships, money, and many more. Lucky thing is that you can listen to Go Youth Podcast in the comfort of your own home. Go Youth Podcast, by the youth, for the youth, about the youth. You are.
All right, thank you so much for that. Wachiri Mutati, your reaction, my brother. We are looking on the Agenda 2063. We're looking on the African Union. We are talking Pan-Africanism. To what extent is the Agenda 2063 and the African Union in general aligning with the spirit of Pan-Africanism? And how effective is it? Because some are giving example to say that silencing guns by 2020, even now, guns are not silenced in Africa. And I could say that it was said that there is the African passport and free movement of people, but we are still required passport to move to African countries. And I'm aware that the one for African free trade that is currently taking place, where one is able to, to trade with other African countries at looking at that what is on the Agenda 2063. Very quickly, what's your reaction on looking on this one? Do you see a disconnect or a connect with the Agenda 2063 with the African Union, looking on the spirit of Pan-Africanism? Is it effective?
Yeah, thank you, Alif. I would like to take a different aspect or perspective from my colleagues who have talked before me. And okay. I don't know if I'll be called the devil's advocate in this position. You see, we are a continent of people who like lamenting. Always lamentation every time, everywhere. You see, we come up with conferences, we come up with meetings, and what do? We discuss and we still lament. There was so much hope in 2013 when the Agenda 2063 was brought forth by the people who brought it forth. And there was so much hope that the Agenda 2063 will actualize the spirit of Pan-Africanism. But I am sorry, we are still lamenting up to today. It has never been actualized up to today. You see, still I am lamenting in the spirit of lamentation. And You've talked about guns being silenced by the year 2020. It is not, unless there is a miracle that is going to happen in this rate that you are going as a continent. I don't think the guns are going to be silenced anytime soon. However, you have asked aligning. So that was, you remember the Pan-Africanism, the spirit of Pan-Africanism was what we can say gave birth to the Agenda 2063. In fact, Agenda 2063 is a brainchild of Pan-Africanism. Now,
Correct.
that is to show you how Agenda 2063 is aligning with the Pan-Africanism movement and the Pan-African spirit. However, how effective has it been? You see, Wole Soyinka, a Nobel laureate from Nigeria, has been talking about this thing since 1960. And what has he been talking about? He has been repeatedly calling for the use of Swahili as a transcontinent language for Africa. Remember, Pan-Africanism is all about bringing the people of Africa together. Now, I want to look at it in this aspect, the aspect of language. You see, when people share a common language, communication becomes easy. And when communication becomes easy, people are able to work well and, just move on about well. So I am glad now, because I've been very pessimistic about AU. Let me be at least optimistic for a moment, but it will not last because you're still lamenting. I am glad that AU nurtured the sentiment of these matters of the language in the year 2004 and adopted Swahili as its official continental language. However, I'm not seeing this issue being brought forth much by non-speaking African languages. It is not being done in a robust manner. They are not pushing it as hard as they should be, because Africans, I don't know, we are just lazy, or I don't know what is up with us. We are not pushing things and the agenda that we are supposed to be pushing. And for example, here in Kenya, Kiswahili is studied right from a very tender age, from a primary school level. Actually, here we call it class 1. Right now, it's been called grade 1. What about the African countries that have not been speaking Swahili since time immemorial? What are they doing? I'm not seeing much. I'm not seeing that issue being implemented in the educational system of these countries. What are we doing? We are busy calling ourselves Francophone. Others are busy calling themselves Anglophone. Others are Lusophone. I hear these days we have Arabophone. We are busy trying to learn languages of European languages. Why is this happening? And yet we have not even actualized. Go to the universities here. For example, in our university here in Kenya, my university is called Kenyatta University. People are busy going to learn Chinese. People are busy going to learn French and other languages of the world. But nobody is interested with the languages of Africa. Nobody, and I think mirroring this issue that is happening here in Kenya, I'm sure even in other countries, for example, in your very own South Africa, I'm sure people are busy wanting to know Chinese, people are busy wanting to know, French and so on.
Yeah.
Are they busy wanting to know Swahili? Are they even interested in knowing other languages of Africa? So, in as much as I am lamenting, I believe there's still hope. I believe that the Agenda 2063, that one day we still have some few more years. Hopefully that by 2063, when we are old and frail, that Agenda 2063 will work. But I think in a manner it is aligning with the spirit of Pan-Africanism, because it was born out of the spirit of Pan-Africanism. But to answer the question how effective and successful it is, that is where I find a problem, to answer that question. I do not see how successful Pan-Africanism and Agenda 2063 are aligning. I also don't see the effectiveness as much, because people are just busy about doing other things, being corrupt and stealing people's funds out here. So we want to believe that there is hope, because this generation that is coming about, especially we as the young people of Africa, I hope that come in the future we are going to, make our continent better, because it should be done and it must be done. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much for that, Wachiri Mutati. Brother, I just want to check something with you. Are you saying that the Agenda 2063, coming from the African Union, is it generally actually aligning with the spirit of Pan-Africanism? Are you saying yes? It's aligning?
Yes, to answer that question in a very scholarly manner, I will say yes, because we have already established by fact that, remember, but AU or OAU was founded in the spirit of Pan-Africanism. Now, OAU, or even later, which came to be African Union, was what now gave birth to Agenda 2063. So, by fact, we can say that the spirit of Pan-Africanism and the Pan-African movement aligns with AU, because without this, we do not see the other. Without Pan-Africanism, we cannot be able to establish what African Union is. And without African Union, then what are we meeting if we don't have the spirit of Pan-Africanism and the reasons to be?
Okay. You said that the Agenda 2063 is the brainchild of Pan-Africanism. I get that. But is it effective though? Because I can tell you, we just made an example by silencing guns in 2022. In 2020, but guns are still not silenced. So which means it's not effective, because looking on the Agenda 2063, there are some of the things which they were supposed to prioritize them. The likes of the African passport and free movement of people. This was something that was supposed to be taken into account. And also the likes of Africa Virtual and e-University. Those are some of the things which are very much important. But we are still waiting for 2063 in order for us to, to be able to accomplish some of those things. Are you actually saying that is it successful or not? I mean, sorry, are you saying that is it effective or not? I want to get that part.
As per
I heard
now,
you saying that is not effective. I heard you saying that for now is not effective, but you're saying that it's a brainchild of the Pan-Africanism.
That's what I'm saying. It is Pan-African Agenda 2063 in itself. It is not effective. However, I was just drawing that interaction between Pan-Africanism and Agenda 2063 through the OAU, because we say that Pan-Africanism is the idea that the people of African descent have common interests and should be unified. Historically, Pan-Africanism has often taken the shape of a political or cultural movement, but Pan-Africanism is the sentiment that people of African descent have great deal in common things, and a fact that deserves notice and even celebration. Without, if there was no Pan-Africanism, or rather Pan-Africanism movement, there could have no been something we call the OAU, the Organization of the African Union. And if that was not in existence, then African Union could not have come about back in the early 2000s. And if AU could not have been there, which established Agenda 2063, it means there will be no Agenda 2063 itself. So in short, what I'm trying to say, it really aligns with Pan-Africanism. But to be effective, no, I don't think it is being effective as it ought to be.
You are listening to Go Youth Podcast with Ali SA. So let's talk about all the societal issues affecting the youth, issues such as relationships, money, and many more. Lucky thing is that you can listen to Go Youth Podcast in the comfort of your own home. Go Youth Podcast, by the youth, for the youth, about the youth. You are are listening to Go Youth Podcast with Ali SA. So, let's talk about all the societal issues affecting the youth, issues such as relationships, money, and many more. Lucky thing is that you can listen to Go Youth Podcast in the comfort of your own home. Go Youth Podcast, by the youth, for the youth, about the youth. You are
All right. Thank you so much. Just coming from a quick break. Now let's move to the question three that we are having in the house. We are looking at the Pan Africanism and the Agenda 2063. We're looking on the question whereby the African Union and the Agenda 2063, whether they're in line with the spirit of the Pan Africanism. We get that point. I like the point that where Ashuri Mutadi is saying that the Agenda 2063 is a brainchild of the Pan Africanism. Now, does Pan Africanism play a part in the development of the African continent? Now, that's what we need to know. Whether does it play a part? Does it play a part? Yes, Pan Africanism is a brainchild of Agenda 2063. And what is in the Agenda 2063 is to make sure that we help our continent, Africa, to be a developed continent. But this is the question that I'm posing to you. Does Pan-Africanism play a part in the development of the African continent? I'll start with you, Omondi.
Pan-Africanism indeed has played a part in the development of African continent to mostly some extent. Number one is it has led to most independence of various countries in the continent, whereby there are prominent figures like Osagyefo Kwame Nkrumah of Ghana, who in his belief, he believed that European colonial rule of Africa could be extinguished if Africans could unite politically and economically. So for a fact, Nkrumah went on the lead to the movement for independence in Ghana, which came to fruition in 1957. Pan-Africanism has led to the development of African continent, going back to its formulation and as it was formerly called the African Association, that gained its legitimacy in London in 1897. Formally and to some extent led to the Pan-African Congress that was held again in London in 1900. So this for a fact, there are various developments and achievements that have been seen since then, since its inception, that have led to the development of Africa itself, Africa as a continent, and the various countries that have been associated with the Pan-Africanism as a whole, whereby it has created the major awareness, the major political awareness among the people of African origin, whether in the African continent or in the diaspora, as it has been attributed that it formerly came to being in the United States. So it has brought a sense of deep concern for those that suffered, especially the blacks that suffered before the colonialist, during the colonialist period. And then it has led to some affirmative steps to the restoration of the status of the black, status of the people of African origin, of the African people, and also the erosion of the slave trade, colonialism, and racism that were then influenced and impacted on the African people and the African descents, majorly in Africa. Both Africa as a whole, Africa as a people, Africa as countries, and Africa as a continent. So to some extent, to most extent, the Pan-Africanist and the Pan-Africanism movement and the Pan-African Congress movement has led to the development of Africa as a continent. Yes, thanks, Ali.
Ali, you are on mute. We cannot hear you.
All right. Thank you so much for that. Omondi, you're actually saying that the Pan-Africanism is playing a part in the development of African continent, because you're saying that some of the policies or some of the I could say some of the policies which the Pan-Africanism is actually insisting that we have to take them into account, assisting Africa to develop. I wish you can give as an example in relation to that, if you have. If you don't, so that I can move to the other. I can move to SK. Okay, SK.
Okay. I think on this question,
does Pan-Africanism play a part in the development of the African continent? Yes, we said that as Africans we need to have a common interest.
Yes, I'm saying I think on this issue, it is very important because currently we are seeing that the issue of Pan-Africanism as a whole was mainly about bringing Africans together as one unit. So it was mainly about the issue of unity. So currently we see that through Pan-Africanism, there has been able to be the issue of regional cooperation has been achieved in Africa currently. Because if you go to countries like South Africa, Zimbabwe, they have a common economic bloc called SADC. So through SADC, they're able to charter and make treaties on how to improve the economies in those countries. And then also in West Africa, we have the ECOWAS economic bloc, which is important in improving the economies of the West African countries. And then the second importance is that it has helped to create political awareness in most African countries because through Pan-Africanism, people are able to get aware of their rights and go ahead to fight for them. Because, for example, in country like Kenya, currently we are now heading to the polls. So as we head to the polls, we see that people are very cautious about the politics of the country. And for example, even the youths, now see the youths that are going to vie for various posts in this election. Yeah. So this has mainly been brought about by their consciousness. Yeah, and then there's an issue of there's also improved. There's been peace in most countries as a result of the peacekeeping missions. Because, for example, when there is a war outbreak in a country, we see that there is a delegation which is sent to make sure that peace is restored. For example, when the Sudan crisis erupted, was it in during the time for Omar al-Bashir? So people from different African countries went there to make sure that there was peace brokered between the north and the south. So, and then there's also the issue of, let me check here.
Yeah.
There is also a global partnership and multilateralism. So, you see, when the Pan-Africanists came up with the issue of Pan-Africanism, they had an issue of making sure that the African were not left behind by the global issues happening around the world. So currently we see that there are many African presidents who make sure that their citizens are able to get aware of the trends that are happening so that they cannot be left behind by the global activities happening. For example, recently when there was the issue of the COVID pandemic all over the world, we see that there were countries who were able to be given the vaccines courtesy of their presidents because they had links in those Western countries who had enough vaccines. So through that goodwill, we see that these Africans I've been able to benefit a lot. Okay, thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, SK Manoa, joining us live from Kenya. All right. I'm moving to Wachiri Mutati. Does the Pan-Africanism play a part in the development of the African continent?
Yes. Thank you, Ali. I'm glad that we really did not define what development you're talking about. So I'm going to just go off the course a bit and talk about something we call like social development. In a book that I'm working on, I've written about something called, rather what I call the impetus of the African identity. And in that discussion that I'm putting forth there, I still base it on the spirit of Pan-Africanism. If you have noted, since we begin this conversation, I've been calling it the spirit of Pan-Africanism. And what do I mean? For example, look at it. For instance, we are here discussing about Africa. We are here. You are in South Africa. We are in Kenya. We have other people from various other parts of this continent. In short, we are here. And it is because of the spirit of Pan-Africanism. We are not as worse as we were in the 1950s. We are not as worse as we are in the beginning of the 20th century and the 21st century. So we have grown a little bit and we have moved further because of what I call the impetus of African identity, or in this context, I like to refer to as the spirit of Pan-Africanism. The whole concept of Pan-Africanism is based on the unity of the African people, which is very vital in terms of economic, political, and social progress. So in this aspect, let us talk about somewhat about economic, because that is what mostly defines development. And in Kiswahili, or rather in Swahili, we say umoja ni nguvu, utengano ni udhaifu. When we are united as a continent under the spirit of Pan-Africanism, when we see ourselves similar, and in this case, you're not only talking about the African people in the African continent, but also people of African descent in the diaspora. We are talking about the Black Americans, you're talking about the Africans living in the United Kingdom, across Asia, and all across the world. We can only develop economically, socially, or even politically if we are united. And this unity is easily brought forth by the spirit of Pan-Africanism. When we look ourselves as one people, as people with similar interests, that is when things are able to change. And I'm very glad that we have mentioned about Agenda 2063. We discussed it last time as its topic the other Sunday. And as you have seen that, especially in this new age of globalization and this new age of rapid technological development, Pan-Africanism has played a very major role in the development of Africa, of the African continent, and also the African people living outside the African continent. Because look at how the Black Americans have been able to develop since they were taken there and enslaved by the people who enslaved them. They have been able to survive up to today. They at least have moved on from what was happening in those times. And it was basically because of this spirit of Pan-Africanism. It has been able to become an impetus and has been able to give them reasons to survive and give them reasons to continue moving forward up to today. Remember, last time we also talked about the African Free Trade Area, which is happening, and one of my colleagues has mentioned about the SADC. Even we have the ECOWAS, we have the East African Community, and we have all those blocks that are there economically, and you can see that they're helping the continent to develop economically. So these things have to work in tandem. They have to work together. They have to work in that way that they balance each other and they are aligning with each other economically, and politically and also socially, that we can be able to develop not only in terms of economic, but also we can develop socially. Right now, the African person cannot be ignored in this continent. There was a time when people used to be, when our forefathers were being ignored during the 20th century. But right now, the world cannot afford to just ignore Africa and the African people. It is because of the spirit of Pan-Africanism, and that is what I call development. Despite the fact that we are still not economically robustly developed, I think we are developing still under the spirit of Pan-Africanism, under what I call the impetus of the African identity. And all of this development, economically, politically, and socially, can only become be actualized well and become robust in different aspects and different manners, if only and when they are rooted in the spirit of Pan-Africanism. So to answer the question, does Pan-Africanism play a part in the development of the African continent? Yes, it really does, because not only is economically but also socially. So it is happening today, and we hope that the people who are now in this continent and outside this continent, and the people who are going to come after us, the future generations, are going to use this not only to develop economically but socially. Yeah, thank you.
All right. Now, before you go off, Wachiri Mutati, I want to ask this question to you. It has been said that most of the the continents, I could say America, China, specifically America, they are telling stories about Africa. Looking on the international media, most of the international media, excluding Africa, you find that on a day-to-day basis, they report about Africa. They report about what is happening in Africa. They even create shows that specifically are talking about Africa. When you come back to Africa, you look at the African medias that we have. They don't even tell a story about what is happening in Africa. We have journalists who are in Africa who are being employed by foreign medias, who are being paid just to tell a story about what is happening in Africa. The medias which are in Africa are not actually reporting about what is happening in Africa. Imagine when you watch CNN, you find that tell you story about South Africa. They tell you about the catch of South Africa. They tell you about what's happening in Zimbabwe. They tell you a lot of things. The international media is having an interest to tell stories about what is happening in Africa. Now, the question is that why is the international media telling stories about Africa, what else we as Africans, it looks like we don't know Africa? The second question that I want to ask you is that it has been said that when we talk about the Pan-Africanism, we're talking about black people. When I'm talking about white people, some are saying that it looks like we've been racist. Why are we excluding the Asians? Why are we excluding the white people? Mutati?
Yeah, thank you. That's a very interesting question. I actually did not see that coming. But to answer your first question on where the media and the international media telling about the African stories, and we as Africans, we are quiet. There are many ways you can look upon this issue. Number one, they are telling our stories because we as Africans, we have failed to tell our story. We as Africans, we are not talking about our story. For example, right now, we are here talking about Africa. How many youths in Africa are talking about Africa? How many youths are even going to the extent of reaching to their fellow brothers in various countries to talk about Africa? We are not. And that's why they are coming in and doing our job for us, talking about Africa in a very different way. When they come to Kenya, what they do, they just talk about how poverty is striking Kenyans, which is true, but that is not the only thing that is happening in Africa. We are not only corrupt, there are good people in Africa. And we are not only having negative issues in Africa. So to answer that question...
just to come in very quick, Omondi, please make sure that you connect your mic and your camera so that you can join. Please go through, Wachiri.
So I was saying that the reason why they're telling our story is because, number one, we have failed to tell our story. We are not talking about Africa. We even feel inferior to talk about Africa. What are the Africans in the diaspora saying? Are they going there and talking about Africa without fear of favor or contradiction? This is who we are. And, I like saying that, colonization brought us here, but what is keeping us here is our own ignorance. And part of that ignorance is fear and failing to talk about Africa. Because if we stand up and say, hey, CNN, you're giving us a good story, but that is not the only thing you're talking that is happening in Africa. Why are they come here as tourists? Why do they not talk about the tourism and the beautiful scenery that they see in Africa? Do they come to here and they see the beautiful scenery and then, you have also see poor people, so that is what you're going to report. Why are they not talking about the economic opportunities that are here in Africa? So we as Africans, we have failed as ourselves. And also on the issue of racism, racism is a very It's a very tricky thing to talk about, especially in this
Yeah,
21st
yeah,
century.
yeah, yeah,
You,
like also we want to get that part whereby whether it's does Africa actually only belongs to black people only? Because that's where the problem comes in. Where you find a
yeah.
lot of people when they keep on talking about Africa, they only want to, to hear a black person speaking. What about the white people?
It will not be fair at this particular point in time. It will not be fair when we speak about Africans as only black people, because in this point, at this point in time has really done much to our continent, especially in your country, South Africa. We see that we have the Africans, we have the white people, we have the Asian communities, and here in Kenya, we have the Indians who are still here in Kenya, and they have been born here and raised in Africa. They don't know anywhere else. They know what is Africa. There have been very many scholarly discussions, especially I remember in university people talk about the question, who is an African? Is an African a person who is an African descent, or is a person who has been born in Africa? Who is then an African? Because if we are going to deny the white people who have been born here in Africa and say they are not Africans, then the black Americans living in America, they should be denied the same right, which will not be fair. So I think we just give it to because at this particular point, this is the fact that those Indians and the white people who are living in Africa, they are still Africans. But the problem with them now is that many of them do not identify with the problems that we have as the black people. You see, we tend to live as if we are in an African country of our own, and yet, for example, we are here. For example, in Kenya, in Nairobi, Kenya, you'll find that these certain communities, they live in certain parts of the town, of the city. So it is really hard and very difficult to associate with them and just to be part and parcel of the African identity. So we are not, there have been leaders who just say, for example, here in Kenya, we are having our general elections coming in August 9th.
Yep.
And one of the presidential aspirants who have been given the chance to vie by the IEBC is called Professor Wajakoya. And Professor Wajakoya had a 2-page manifesto, and the last part of his manifesto, he said that he's going to chase all the foreigners who are idle. And now the question comes, how do you know who's an idol? And people who have been born in Africa, where are you going to tell them to go?
That's very
An Indian who has been born in Nairobi, Kenya, you tell them to go back to India. They do not know India. They do know Kenya. So that is something that we need to discuss more about. Thank you.
All right, no problem. No, it's something that we have to have a look on it as an isolated matter. Very quickly, let's check SK. We see foreign medias actually telling stories about Africa, and it looks like there's a confusion in SK whether it's an African, a black child, or it's an African, also a black and white people. SK, what's your reaction on this one? The international media telling stories about Africa and looking on the African child, whether it's a black or white person. SK?
Oh, okay, Ali. I think on this issue, it is a mental issue because in Africa there is an issue where when there's a white person and a black, the black usually come to behave as if they are a lower being than the whites. So I think that thing was actually put in place by the whites when they came in Africa, because even in campus recently we see that when a class has a white person, the lecturer seems to give some more attention to the white more than the black. And the funny thing is that both of these lecturers, they are black. So like you somehow wonder what are they doing to the people. So I think that thing is just on the mental issue. And then on the question about the CNN reporting, more of
not specifically CNN,
giving much
the
emphasis
international
on the
media.
Yeah. So I think that also comes in place on the issue of racism. because that thing is a big matter to discuss currently, because this thing doesn't seem to go away. Yeah, and then like for example, I can give there's this guy working on CNN. I think it's from South Africa. I don't know his name. Is it Trevor Noah? So I think when he went there, he seemed to have forgotten the African roots, because when he's reporting, see that he's giving emphasis more on the whites and news, and then he forgets about the motherland. Okay, so that's my contribution.
Okay. All right, no, it's fine. Let me get to Omondi. Omondi, very quickly. We see international medias on the ground reporting stories about Africa, which it looks like the African medias, I don't know whether they don't have interest or they don't know Africa. They don't have stories that they can tell about Africa. And most of the international medias, they even created shows about Africa, where they employ journalists from Africa. They pay them just to tell stories about Africa. And we are aware that we have Africans who don't even know how many countries do we have in Africa, don't even know about Agenda 2063, don't even know about what is happening in other Africans in Africa. And secondly, I was saying that who is an African child? An African child, is it the black person or white person, or is it the black and white person? Omondi?
To probably begin in the last statement, a black child and a white child, it varies. Commonly, if we look for instance, in South Africa, majorly we have South Africans who are whites, we have South Africans who are blacks. So for you to be attributed as an African child, your norms, your ideals, and everything attributed to Africa need to be seen and depicted in your ways and values. So the major problem that we have, especially in the international media and so on and so forth, as you have put it, we have this black-white wealth gap. For instance, we have black-white wealth gap chart. We also have global inequality that have been seen here and there in terms of even the media itself. There are some things that they speak of Africa black, the black child and the black person, and also the African continent as a whole, which the view which they give to the globe and the world as a whole, which to some extent is negative, that majorly bring those inequalities in terms of the racial wealth gap that have been seen here and there. The race holds the most of the wealth, while the black race holds the least of the wealth. So there is that inequality that has been seen. The impact, what is given out there, is what majorly attributes to the psychological and the mental depiction of what Africa is, and then the rest of the globe also emulates it. As we've seen recently, when the whites come to Africa, the level at which the blacks, the average black person treats the other the whites is mostly superior. They are associated with the high-end hotels, high-end places, and so on and so forth. But as a black person, probably me, if I go to the other continents, probably Europe, the level at which I'll be treated as an individual black majorly brings that sense of inequality, which begins to decline slightly, and in which societies as a whole are bridged in a certain spectrum where we as a people are seen as lesser beings. So this has been seen even prior to mostly during the slavery period, the colonialist period, and as for a fact being a method in which as blacks we see them as superior, while they see us as inferior. So these are just Eurocentric views that even you'll be shocked that other black Africans see Africans themselves, the black Africans, as lesser beings. To some extent, it's ironical when a black person sees the other black as a lesser being, which to some extent, you'll be surprised, Ali. You'll be surprised that even if you go to the European world and find a fellow black, he or she will treat you as a fellow black in the most inferior most way that even the white himself or herself can treat you better than the person. So majorly it's a psychological and mental way of people and the global inequality that has been attributed to the way we see the black and white gap and the gap chart that we as a people have been seeing that bridges inequality and the racial wealth gap therein has brought a lot of issues related to the media, the blacks themselves, the continent of Africa, and the rest of the world. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Omonti, for that. All right. In less than a minute, I want to ask this question before I get to the last question that you can see on the screen. It has been said that looking on Africa as a whole, from the African Union, in most cases you find that they need support. Could be financial support. You find that maybe Africa is going through a lot. Maybe they need financial support. They need to be financed by foreign countries. They need to be financed by the likes of America. They need to be financed by the likes of China. Don't you think they have a little bit influence in Africa? That is a question that we don't have to answer it. It's a question that we'll have to answer in the next motion that we're going to have. Now, the question that I'm having here is that moving forward, how can the people of Africa employ Pan-Africanism for the benefit of the continent? We're going to start with you, Omondi. Omondi?
Yeah, yes, thank you. Just to begin, the world is not an equal space.
In a minute, please use a minute.
Yeah, the world. Yeah. I'll try my level best. The world itself is not an equal place, whereby each person's experience is different with regards to the human rights, opportunities, and quality of life. Therefore, the way forward that Pan-Africanism will bridge, it will be seen to be attributed close to religion, as where its future, first of all, is affirmative. There's positivity in Pan-Africanism, whereby as we grow, especially the youth, we continue to see globalization as weakening boundaries, as weakening boundaries of statehood, and as young people in Africa, we are increasingly becoming aware of our own political and economic environment. So I'm seeing a positive way in which the Pan-Africanism and Africanists themselves are going to be a Western driven in leading a united Africa, and therefore the future is optimistic, according to me. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much. I see that there's a comment that is coming from, I don't know, it's Chris Wani, saying that perhaps the greatest difference between a black child and a white child, it's more about the mental than the background origin. All right. I want to ask this question also to SK Manoa. SK, how can the people of Africa employ the Pan-Africanism for the benefit of the continent? SK? SK, are you there? All right. I don't know what's happening with SK, or whether SK might be having network problem. SK, you're on mute. Please unmute. Okay. Very, very quickly, I'm going to move to Wachiri Mutati. Wachiri Mutati, in a minute, what is your reaction looking on how can the people of Africa employ Pan-Africanism for the benefit of the continent?
Thank you, Ali. As I said, we are a people who like to lament. I don't know about your people in South Africa. And
Yeah.
I'm not going to lament, however, because I believe we can make or change this issue of looking at ourselves in an inferior manner, and that's how people of Africa can employ Pan-Africanism, And how are we going to do that? It's just simple. African people should start using their heads, Let us start thinking. I think that's why they normally like to say when you want to hide something from an African, you put it in a book, because we don't like reading and we don't even like to think. And we do not appreciate our heritage as ourselves. We can only employ Pan-Africanism when we start changing our mind and changing how we think. I know I've said this a number of times in this podcast, but it is always my takeaway point at any particular juncture when we're discussing about Africa. It boils down to the mind, because even you start to decolonize a person, you start decolonizing them in the mind. And when we are going to change our thinking as Africans, and even Africans who are living in diaspora and they want to associate themselves as Africans, then we are going to help ourselves by employing the spirit of Pan-Africanism, the spirit that the people who brought this issue of Pan-Africanism had in mind. And that's when you're going to change the matters of Africa. Actually, if we just change how we think as Africans and we start thinking, everything is going to change in Africa, not only Pan-Africanism, but everything. Thank you.
In the spirit of Pan-Africanism. Okay, now very quickly, I'm gonna move to the conclusion of the show, but I will start with SK Manoa. SK Manoa, what is your submission for the whole podcast that we had? SK Manoa, what is your submission from motion one from the first question up to the last question that we had? What is your submission, SK Manoa? SK Manoa, are you there? All right, I believe SK might be having some technical issues. I'm gonna go back to Omondi. Omondi, what is your submission? Looking on from the first question that we had, looking at what is the Pan-Africanism and looking on the Pan-African Congress movement, while we're looking at the importance and whether was it necessary or not, and looking on the extent what the Agenda 2063 and the African Union, whether they were aligning with the spirit of the Pan-Africanism. And we also looked on the role that the Pan-Africanism is playing in the development of the African continent. While we're wrapping up the show, Omondi, what is your submission to the show?
Yes, I think I'm not going to speak much. If I do, kindly Ali just forgive me on the same. On Pan-Africanism and what it has brought on the African continent, the rest of the globe, and let me put Europe as itself, not the rest of the globe. I don't know why. I'm just trying. On what is Pan-Africanism, that was the first and the most one we need to understand as a people. What is Pan-Africanism? What is the context to which it was brought in 1897, leading to the first ever meeting put in place in the 1900s. So the idea that people of African descent have common interests and the need of them to be unified as a whole need to be put in place. The narrowest interpretation of this is to envision a unified African nation whereby as a people as a people of the African diaspora, as a people of the African descent and the African continent as a whole, we need to have a sense of belonging. When you have a sense of belonging, you put it as you put that thing itself, let me put the specimen itself as if it is yours. When you own it as a person, the sentiment itself of the people of African descent, we have a great deal of commonality, and a fact that we need to notice and even celebrate. When we celebrate this, and we come to the Agenda 2063, the African Union, as I earlier placed it before in our previous discourse, we need to have a ratification of of the things we put in place as a people, are they going to be effectualized? Are we going to be effectualized? But in terms of action, we are not bringing these things to to effectiveness. So are we ready? Are we really ready as an African continent, as the black people who have black civilization and those of African descent? Are we really ready to have a sense of the Pan-Africanist thought? Are we having things of African? Are we having the African commodity strategy that we spoke of in the Agenda 2063? Are we really having the raw materials? Are we really having the structure problem whereby everything is being processed in Europe, while the major raw materials and the mineral resource come only in Africa? Is colonialism still a factor? Yes, it is. But as Pan-Africanists, are we going to not only have the nationalistic attribute and thought, but majorly we see it as a patriotic thing of having a united Africa? Is it just on paper, or we have it as a people are going to have a self-driven way of having Africa as a whole? Way forward is at its core. Pan-Africanism is the belief that the African people, both on the continent and in the diaspora, share not only a mere common history, but a common destiny. So let us have a future that the destiny itself, that we are going to achieve what is of Africa, but not only have a common history that we were once enslaved, now we are Africa, we are independent, we have the Pan-African. We'll be having sort of organizations that are both. There'll be post-Pan-Africanism, there'll be pre-Pan-Africanism probably in future. But then if we don't have a common history, if we only have a common history but not a common destiny, then there is nothing we are yet to achieve. So the best thing is that we should have a decency of a common descent as an African people, of not only a common history but a common destiny. So take home for me is not only having a common history but having a common destiny. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much. Let me throw it back to SK Manoa. SK Manoa, it looks like you're just having some technical issues on your side, SK Manoa. Very quickly, SK Manoa, what is your submission looking on the show from the beginning of the questions and up to where we are? Because I see that you are disconnecting some other times when we are trying to get hold of you. SK Manoa, what's your submission looking on the show?
Okay, before I give my submission, I think I'll also be able to give the last question, the answer of the last question on the issue of moving forward. How can Africa employ Pan-Africanism? So on that issue, I think that question can be easily answered if Africans put in place the issues about the Agenda 2063. Because on those agendas, you can now say that, for example, maybe when the guns are silenced, that will be a good way of ensuring that the issue of Pan-Africanism is established. And then also the issue of free movement of people from one country to the other, because currently there's a very big problem about the border post in most countries. Because for example, if I can give an example of in Kenya, if someone is from West Africa, going to West Africa might be a challenge, because the passports in East Africa are somewhat different from the requirements that are there in West Africa. So, and then also the issue of universities being put in place. So that will enable the big issue of Pan-Africanism to be put in place. And then finally, if also the civil rights of all the Africans are able to be observed, that would ensure that democracies are improved in most countries. And then now back to the summary of this all talk tonight. I think when we when we began, we were talking about Pan-Africanism. So my takeaway tonight on the issue of Pan-Africanism is that Pan-Africanism was mainly brought about to promote and foster unity among Africans, because there's an old adage that goes, "A people united cannot easily be defeated." So, and then going ahead on the part of the Congress about Pan-Africanism is that this Congress was important because it laid down the ideals that the Pan-Africanists up to date use them. Because, for example, there's this leader, I think it's the leader of EFF in South Africa, Comrade Malema. I think currently in Africa, that will be the person that I look up to, for him to spearhead the issue of Pan-Africanism, because I think to him is more of a Afrocentric guy. So if we have such leaders being having power, this might help in bringing Pan-Africanism to the heights that the founders like Nkrumah were aiming to take the issue of Pan-Africanism to those levels. And then to the second question on the issue of Agenda 263 and the AU on how they promote Pan-Africanism, I think currently this is where there is a big disconnect, because if you see the goals of Agenda 263, I think they are so high that achieving them without Africa is without the African countries currently are behaving will be difficult. And then also on the issue of AU and Pan-Africanism, I think if only the African countries begin working as a unit in tackling issues, that's now when the Pan-Africanism will be promoted in Africa. But if you continue being selfish and going and doing things separately, that will also be difficult to achieve Pan-Africanism in Africa. And then to the third question on how Pan-Africanism as a whole plays on the development of the continent, I think the issues were very clear, because mostly it was about the issue of unity.
Yeah, we are against time. We are running against time, brother man.
Yeah. So I think that's my contribution tonight. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Very quickly, thank you so much, SK, for your summing up of our podcast. But very quickly, we're left with Achille Mutati. Achille Mutati, in less than 2 minutes, looking on the question that we have touched, all of them. Before we give you a conclusion, in the spirit of Nelson Mandela, Patrice Lumumba, Sir Abuka from Nigeria, in the spirit of Maria Ngobai from the Republic of Congo, in the spirit of Mohammed Anawa al-Sadar from Egypt, in the spirit of Samuel Doe from Libya, in the spirit of Jovania coming from Rwanda, in Burundi, in the spirit
I cannot hear you, Ali. I think your sound has gone. You have been muted. I think I've lost, but I want to assume that the question you've asked is in terms of a conclusion. And I hope you can hear me. Can you hear me? Ali, I think I've lost you. Can you still hear me? Still here? Okay, I think I'm just going to go for because I think we have some connection issues. So in my conclusion, you have all mentioned a lot of people. You have said in the spirit of a lot of people, but I'm going to be a bit different and talk about, or rather, be in the spirit of Mrs. Dlamini Zuma, the current South African Home Affairs Minister, and the former Foreign Minister, who was the first woman to hold the office of the African Union Commission.
Mhm.
When she was in office as the chairperson who was holding that African Commission post, she wrote an imaginary letter to Kwame Nkrumah, and she was apologizing to Kwame Nkrumah. And she was saying that you're sorry because you've been ignorant, all that. And I think it is in the same spirit that I think I'm going to end this discussion by apologizing to our forefathers and the people who began the spirit of Pan-Africanism, those people who came about and brought this spirit, but many people out here, they are not following that. And I'm sure that if many of them are able to come back today, they will be, I don't know, they will just wonder what is happening in Africa. So I think, just as Dlamini Zuma, I will apologize to them on behalf of my fellow brothers and sisters of Africa. It just boils down to how we think. And if we wake up and change our thinking and how we behave as a continent, we will be able, to take the continent further. So in the spirit of Pan-Africanism and the spirit of making Africa great, I want to thank the organizers of this event very much. They have done a good job and for inviting us here. And we're looking forward to much conversation in the future. So I want to thank them very much. Asanteni sana, as we say here in Kenya. Asante sana.
You are listening to Go Youth Podcast with Ali SA. So let's talk about all the societal issues affecting the youth, issues such as relationships, money, and many more. Lucky thing is that you can listen to Go Youth Podcast in the comfort of your own home. Go Youth Podcast, by the youth, for the youth, about the youth. You are